Good morning, everyone. I am Sir Sai.
And I am Sir Carms, and today we will conduct an experiment on first law of motion.
Particularly on friction between a wooden block and a friction board. So before we proceed with our laboratory activity, first let us discuss what are the objectives of this activity. So first, we will determine experimentally the values of coefficient of static and kinetic friction between two surfaces in contact. Second is to use the concept of the first law of motion to compute for the values of coefficient of static and kinetic friction between two surfaces in contact. And last is to identify the factors affecting frictional force. So those are the objectives for today's laboratory activity.
Consider the block of wood that is at rest on a surface. The block is acted upon by the following forces. First, the weight, which is applied vertically down, and then since there is surface, then that surface exerts an upward force. That is what we call the normal force, which is exerted vertically up by the surface on the block. Now, when an external force, Fa, is applied on it, the block remains at rest because of the presence of the friction force. As long as the block remains stationary, these two forces must be equal. Remember, the first law of motion, summation of forces must be equal to 0 Newton when our object is at rest. This friction force that resists the block from moving is what we call static friction. However, when the applied external force becomes too large, the block will eventually start to move. As the block is on the threshold of moving, the static friction attains its maximum value. While the block is in constant motion, the value of static friction reduces to the value of kinetic friction. The frictional force that acts between moving surfaces is referred to as kinetic friction.
So what are the materials that we will be used in this activity? First, we have a friction block, and then we will also use a spring balance, and we also have a set of weight, particularly a 500 grams weight, and last is we will be using a wooden board. So those are the materials that we will need in this laboratory activity. So what are the procedures of our laboratory activity today? So first, get the weight in Newton of the friction block using the spring balance, then record. Second is to place the friction block with its big area in contact with a horizontal wooden board. And using the spring balance, slowly pull the block horizontally. We can refer to the previous discussion on how to pull the block horizontally. So when the friction block starts to move, observe the reading of the balance in Newton, then record. So this is the force needed to overcome the static friction. Then place a 500 grams weight on the top of the friction block and repeat step number 2. Fourth step, place the friction block with its big area in contact with the horizontal wooden board, and using the spring balance, slowly pull the block horizontally. When the friction block is already in constant motion, observe the reading of the balance, then record. For feet, repeat step number 4, but this time with a 500-gram load placed on top of the friction block. 6 is place the friction block on one end of the wooden board. Slowly lift this end until the block begins to slide down by itself. Okay, you can refer on the previous discussion. Then hold the wooden board at its inclination and measure the height and its base, and then record the. Repeat step 6, in which the friction block slides down the wooden board in uniform motion after it is given a slight push. From the values recorded, compute for the coefficient of static and kinetic friction using the equations. So the coefficient of static or kinetic friction is equal to the frictional force divided by the normal force, and the coefficient of static or kinetic friction is equal to the height divided by the base. Then after you compute for the coefficient of static and kinetic friction, answer the data results and the analysis and discussion, and then write your conclusion at the last part of the activity. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I am Sir Sai,
And I am Sir Carnes.